Thank you and good morning, everyone. My name is Jake Zatzkin, and I will be your facilitator this morning. We also have a great team monitoring the chat panel to answer any questions that may come up during the webinar. I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Goodwin, who will be guiding us through our material today. Welcome to our IMR 107 webinar. We are excited to be here today and present an introduction to securing high-value assets. Let's get started, Joe. What are we looking at today?
Hey, good morning, Jake, and good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. So during this webinar, we'll discuss the essential information you need to help secure your high-value assets, which are comparable to critical assets in the private sector. In the first half, we will begin with a short introduction to high-value assets, or HVAs. We'll review the threat landscape, the federal guidance and risk management guidance and considerations. And then during the second half of the webinar, we'll explore a few real-world examples of HVA-related attacks and their impacts. This webinar is designed to provide a general understanding of high-value assets in order to enable learners to better protect themselves and their organizations from attacks against these critical targets. We will define high-value assets. We'll understand the high-level threats and impacts of attacks on HVAs. We'll reference requirements and recommended actions for HVA protection, and then explore impacts of these attacks through a few case studies.
That sounds great. Can you give us a quick overview of high-value assets?
Sure. So let's start with an understanding of what a high-value asset is. CISA defines HVAs as information or an information system that is so critical to an organization that the loss or the corruption of this information or loss of access to the system would have serious impact to the organization's ability to perform its mission or conduct business. Importantly, for those outside of the federal civilian enterprise, you may also know these HVAs as critical assets. The Office of Management and Budget, via OMB 1709, further defines HVAs as, quote, assets, federal information systems, information and data for which an unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction could cause a significant impact to the United States national security interests. It could impact foreign relations, the economy, or to the public confidence, civil liberties, or public health and safety of the American people. HVAs may contain sensitive controls or instructions or data used in critical federal operations. Or they could have unique collections of data by either size or content, or support an agency's mission essential functions, making them of specific value to criminal or potentially politically motivated or state-sponsored actors for either direct exploitation or to cause a loss of confidence in the U.S. government. So again, in short, HVAs are the most important information assets to your organizations, and they often make prime targets for cyber threat actors. OMB Pub 1903 has since broadened the definition to allow agencies to apply it to assets that they deem critical. So according to 1903, an HVA can be any information or information system that falls into one of these three categories. Number one, it's informational value. So the information or information system that processes, stores, or transmits the information is of high value to the government or its adversaries. So essentially any sensitive or classified data. Number two, it's mission essential. So the agency that owns the information or the information system cannot accomplish its primary mission essential function within expected timelines without the information or the system. And then third, federal civilian enterprise essential. So the information or the system serves a critical function in maintaining the security and resilience of the federal civilian enterprise. I think we all know that sometimes the best lessons are taught through history. So we thought we'd highlight an interesting event, kind of out of the norm, that occurred nearly 120 years ago that demonstrates the interest in, I'm using air quotes, high-value assets, even before the dawn of complicated computer systems. So you may know the name of Marconi. If it sounds familiar, it's because he's the one who's considered the father of the modern radio. However, he did hit a bit of a speed bump one day while demonstrating a new technology. Marconi had invented a wireless form of communications. It was essentially a point-to-point wireless telegraph. It was the first of its kind. So on June 4th of 1903, Marconi had set up a public demonstration of his new, quote, secure wireless system. And he planned to show the public in a public lecture hall at the Royal Institution of London. Now, Marconi himself was actually 300 miles away in Cornwall and would be sending the wireless message to his assistant, Fleming, who was in the theater in London. So the exciting moment had come for Fleming to receive the transmission in London. The receiver started accepting the signal, and the Morse code printer, which was used to translate the signal, had started printing out just one word over and over again, and the word was rats. It then continued printing out phrases seemingly mocking Marconi to include rude personal jabs and even lines from Shakespeare. Well, as it turns out, Marconi's demonstration of his secure wireless technology had been hacked. The culprit was a man named Neville Maskelyne. His motive was simple. He had a grievance with Marconi, as both men had made great strides in the development of wireless communication technology. But Marconi had the advantage. So the hackers simply wanted to defame the reputation of Marconi by publicly embarrassing him and showing that his technology was vulnerable. Maskelyne had essentially beamed in powerful wireless pulses in close proximity, which overpowered the pulses that were due to come in from Cornwall, which again was over 300 miles away. Well, clearly it worked. He proved that wireless signals could be intercepted and interfered with. Now, the implications were serious to Marconi. Technology like this was of extremely high value for long-range communications, but the hack made clear that there was definitely more work to be done. They had to refine the technology and make it more effective. Here's a random little fun fact about Neville Maskelyne, by the way, who was the hacker. So he was actually best known for his other career, which was as a magician. So years later, his son, Jasper, had applied these magical skills that he'd learned from his father in World War II, where he was involved in the development of the fake munitions, the blow-up tanks, and other trickery that you may have seen on the History Channel that helped mislead the Nazis in the lead up to D-Day. It's an interesting fact there.
That's great. Now we would like to pause and poll the audience. Please answer the following questions. In the polling pods that will appear on the screen, does your agency or organization maintain an active inventory of high-value assets?
All right. Looks like a lot of folks are maintaining that inventory. That's fantastic.
Yes, that's great.
If you don't, but it's good. That's one of the key steps in understanding and mitigating and being prepared for these sorts of attacks. So it looks like we've got most of the people who've wanted to chime in and chimed in. So that's great. About 92% of the folks maintain an inventory. That's great. Now we do have one more question for the group, so we'll bring up a new pod.
Yeah, absolutely. Did your agency submit their HVA list to CISA via the BOD 1802 data call?
And again, we're not holding to this. We just want to get a sense of who had worked with the BOD and submitted information.
It's anonymous. We're not taking down names.
But it does look like certainly a majority of folks, about 2/3, have submitted back on the 1802 BOD data call. It's good. So good to see some folks have experience with that. Excellent. Okay, with that, looks like most folks have chimed in. So we will roll on. So now that we have established a basic understanding of what HVAs are, who's at risk from attacks on these targets? Well, it's not just the organizations themselves. Everyone with important information stored on HVAs or these critical asset systems can be harmed by a successful cyber attack. If you have a high-value asset, or if your information is included within an HVA system or data set, then you're susceptible, no matter how critical you or others may perceive it to be. So let's take some time to examine the types of threats to HVAs. The following are outlined by the Government Accountability Office. So we'll divide these up into three groups: adversaries, exploits, and then the impacts of the HVA attacks. So first are the adversaries. We'll go through these, starting with botnet operators. So botnet operators use a network or a botnet of comprised remotely controlled systems to coordinate attacks and to distribute phishing schemes, spam, and malware attacks. The services of these networks are sometimes made available on underground markets. So, for example, purchasing a denial of service attack or purchasing services related to those, or relaying spam or phishing attacks. Then we've got criminal groups. These folks seek to attack systems for monetary gain, typically. Specifically, organized criminal groups use cyber exploits to commit identity theft, online fraud, and computer extortion. International corporate spies and criminal organizations also pose a threat to the U.S. through the ability to conduct industrial espionage and large-scale monetary theft, and to hire or develop hacker talent. The hackers and hacktivists break into networks for the challenge and revenge, stalking, or monetary gain, among other reasons. Hacktivists are ideologically motivated actors who use cyber exploits to further political goals. While gaining unauthorized access once required a fair amount of skill or computer knowledge, hackers can now simply just download attack scripts and protocols from the internet and launch them against victim sites. Thus, while attack tools have become more sophisticated, they've also become easier to use. According to the CIA, the large majority of hackers do not have the requisite expertise to threaten difficult targets such as U.S. Critical networks. Nevertheless, the worldwide population of hackers does pose a high threat of an isolated or a brief disruption causing serious damage. Insiders are disgruntled folks within an organization. This is a principal source of computer crime. Insiders may not need a great deal of knowledge about computer intrusions because their position within the organization often allows them to gain unrestricted access and cause damage to the targeted systems. The insider threat includes contractors hired by the organization, as well as careless or poorly trained employees who may inadvertently introduce malware into the systems. Nations use cyber tools as part of their information gathering and espionage activities. In addition, several nations are aggressively working to develop information warfare doctrine, programs, and capabilities. These capabilities enable a single entity to potentially have a significant and serious impact by disrupting the supply, communications, and the economic infrastructures that support military power. Impacts that could affect the daily lives of citizens across the country. In his February 2015 testimony, the Director of National Intelligence stated that among state actors, China and Russia have highly sophisticated cyber programs, while Iran and North Korea have lesser technical capabilities but possibly more disruptive intent. And then we have terrorists who seek to destroy, incapacitate, or exploit critical infrastructures in order to threaten national security, cause mass casualties, weaken the economy, and damage public morale and confidence. Terrorists may use phishing schemes or spyware or malware in order to generate funds or gather sensitive information. Now let's look at the exploits we have listed here. Starting with cross-site scripting. This is an attack that uses third-party web resources to run scripts within the victim's web browser or scriptable applications. This occurs when a browser visits a malicious website or clicks a malicious link. The most dangerous consequences occur when this method is used to exploit additional vulnerabilities that may permit an attacker to steal cookies, log keystrokes, capture screenshots, or discover and collect network information and remotely access and control the victim's machine. A denial of service attack, or a distributed denial of service attack, DDoS, is an attack that prevents or impairs the authorized use of networks, systems, or applications by completely exhausting the resources. The distributed DOS attack is a variant of DOS that uses numerous hosts to perform the attack. Malware, or simply malicious code or malicious software, refers to a program that is inserted into a system, usually covertly, with the intent of compromising the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of the victim's data, apps, or operating system, or simply otherwise just annoying or disrupting the victim. These are things like logic bombs, Trojan horses, ransomware, viruses, and worms. Then we have phishing or spear phishing, which is a form of social engineering that uses authentic-looking but fake emails to request information from users or direct them to fake websites that request information. Spear phishing is a phishing exploit that is targeted to a specific individual or a specific group. So it's less shotgun approach, much more laser focused. Passive wiretapping, as the name would infer, is the monitoring or recording of data, such as passwords transmitted in clear text while they're being transmitted over a comms link. This is done without altering or affecting the data. Spamming is sending those unsolicited, annoying commercial email advertising products for services and websites. But spam can also be used as a delivery mechanism for malware and other cyber threats, which is yet another reason why you shouldn't be clicking on those spam emails. Spoofing is creating a fraudulent website to mimic an actual one, but it's run by another party. Email spoofing occurs when the sender address and other parts of an email header are altered to appear as though it's coming from the actual, but it's actually originating from a different source. SQL injections are attacks that involve the alteration of a database search in a web-based application, which can then be used to obtain unauthorized access to the actual sensitive information in that database. War driving is the method of driving through cities and neighborhoods with a wireless equipped computer, sometimes with a powerful antenna, and it's searching for unsecured wireless networks as a way to gain entry into systems. And then last but not least, on the exploits, we have zero-day. This takes advantage of security vulnerability that is previously unknown to the general public. In many cases, the exploit code is written by the same person who discovered the vulnerability. By writing an exploit for the previously unknown vulnerability, the attacker creates a potent threat, since the compressed time frame between discoveries of both make it very difficult to defend against. And finally, as computer technology has advanced, both government and private entities have become increasingly dependent on computerized information systems to carry out operations and to process, maintain, and report that essential information. So ineffective protection of these information systems and networks can result in failure to deliver all of these good vital services and result in the following sorts of impacts: the loss of resources, assets, or funds, the inappropriate access to and disclosure or modification, or worse yet, destruction of sensitive information, such as national security information, PII, or proprietary business info, the disruption of essential ops, supporting critical infrastructure, national defense, or emergency services, the undermining of agency missions due to embarrassing incidents that erode the public's confidence in government, the use of computer resource for unauthorized purposes to launch other attacks on other systems, and then obviously damage to the networks themselves or to physical equipment, and high costs for remediation of these incidents. So when it comes to the process around an attack on an HVA, an adversary may employ multiple tactics and techniques. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, has identified several representative events that may constitute one of these attacks, starting with performing reconnaissance and gathering information. So they may gather information on a target, for example, by scanning network perimeters or using publicly available information. Then crafting or creating attack tools that the adversary uses to prepare its means of attack. So they could be crafting phishing emails or creating that spoof website is the tool. Then they deliver or insert the malicious capabilities. They can use common delivery mechanisms such as email, as we talked about, or downloadable software, or which would then insert or install the malware into that target system. Then once it's in, exploiting and compromising. They can exploit that poorly configured or unauthorized or otherwise vulnerable information system to then gain access. The attack is conducted. This can include efforts to intercept information or disrupt operations. Then their results are achieved. Those desired results include obtaining the sensitive information via network sniffing or exfiltration. It could be causing the degradation or destruction of the target's capabilities or damaging the integrity of the information through modifications or deleting. Then lastly, maintaining a presence or a set of capabilities on the system. An adversary may try to maintain that undetected presence on the target systems by inhibiting the effectiveness of the intrusion detection capabilities or adapting behavior in response to the organization's surveillance security measures. So next, we'd like to highlight a couple important documents that lay out some federal requirements related to the protection of HVAs. Starting with OMB Circular A130, federal agencies must include security requirements in planning and budgeting activities, must categorize information and information systems, and select and implement security controls that meet the minimum requirements in FIPS 200. With respect to DHS BOD 1802, it's also required federal agencies to submit details on agency high-value assets to DHS. Out of this BOD, there were 4 actions that were outlined. Some of these were time-sensitive at the time, but generally speaking, it's good to look at these actions. The specifics of the BOD can be read on the CISA website. But Action 1 was the identification and submission of the coordination points of contact for those HVA assessments. That was simply identifying a lead federal employee, POC, and at least one backup who was responsible for coordinating the assessments. Then second was submitting the agency HVAs, submitting that current prioritized HVA list, which we referenced earlier in the Ask the Audience poll. This would be inclusive of the agency enterprise. And this will be done again through that identified HVA POC and then submitted through HISN, the Homeland Security Information Network. That would then be reviewed on a quarterly basis to ensure that it's updated. The Action 3 was participating in those DHS-led assessments. So if you were selected to participate in a DHS-led HVA assessment, rules of engagement would be established. For each HVA assessed, the ROE would have an appendix to go over it. It was expected that the organization fully participate in that assessment of each of the HVAs. There was really no imposition or restrictions on the timing or the frequency of the assessments for that. And then Action 4 was obviously then ensuring that timely remediation of the identified vulnerabilities that came out of the assessment and then reporting the mitigation plans and progress back to DHS. If it was determined that the remediation plan could be achieved in expected timeframes, it would be expected to submit basically that justification and a timeline for when those remediations could go ahead and be put in place. The remediation plan was to be signed by the agency official prior to the submission to DHS.
Thanks, Joe. I know that was a lot of information, but I do really appreciate the context. My wife recently started working with a new bio-ISAC, and it is both alarming and impressive hearing about the intense mitigation and remediation processes that organizations have to construct and execute. It's crazy.
It is, and it's important, again, and we'll talk about we'll talk about OMB Memo 1903 here, but again, the general process of understanding what your assets are, assessing them and mitigating, that general flow is universal across anything, but yes, it's critical to be able to do that. So if we look at 1903, this was strengthening the cybersecurity of federal agencies by enhancing the HVA program. This outlines updated expectations and criteria for the HVA program. So first, just running through these quickly, agencies must designate an integrated agency-level governance structure. This is basically a dedicated office or team to be responsible for incorporating HVA activities into broader agency planning activities for information system security and privacy management. The memo updated the approach to HVA identification, establishing 3 categories under which an agency may designate an HVA to allow greater flexibility in the identification and the designation of high-value assets. An agency may designate an HVA when it relates to one or more of the following categories: informational value, mission essential, and then the federal civilian enterprise essential. And again, we covered those previously in the prior slide. The agency CIOs, CISOs, CFOs, and other cybersecurity-related leadership roles really must work together in coordination with the HVA PMO to allocate agency resources to ensure the effective protection of HVAs. This includes adopting methodology provided by DHS to prioritize their HVAs and associated activities. And then to increase the trustworthiness of the HVA information systems, agencies must implement security controls and related activities that are required in NIST SP 800-160 throughout the software development lifecycle for all designated HVAs. And agencies must identify all HVAs that handle PII to ensure that the required privacy documentation and materials are complete, accurate, and up to date. Agencies should also implement a process to